good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook cover to cover. Today, we're on Chapter 31, Section 2. Yesterday, we talked about Italy, Germany, Spain, and World War II formations. Here we are, Chapter 31, Section 2, the global conflict. The Axis powers advance. Hitler will collapse the day we declare war on Germany, predicted a confident French general on the eve of World War II. He could not have been more wrong. World War II, the costliest war in history, lasted 6 years from 1939 to 1945. It pitted the Axis powers, chiefly Germany, Italy, and Japan, against the Allied powers, which eventually included Britain, France, the Soviet Union, China, and the United States, and 45 other nations. Early Axis gains. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi forces stormed into Poland, revealing an enormous power of Hitler's Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. First, German planes bombarded airfields, factories, towns, and cities, and screaming dive bombers fired on troops and civilians. Then, fast-moving tanks and troops transports roared into the country. The Polish army fought back unsuccessfully. While Germany attacked from the west, Stalin's forces invaded from the east, grabbing lands promised to them under the Nazi-Soviet pact. Within a month, Poland ceased to exist. Hitler passed the winter without much further action. Stalin's armies, however, pushed into the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Soviet forces also seized part of Finland, which put up stiff but unsuccessful resistance. The Phony War. During the first winter, the French hunkered down behind the Maginot Line. Britain sent troops to wait with them. Some reporters referred to this quiet time as the Phony War. Then, in April 1940, the war exploded into action. Hitler launched a blitzkrieg against Norway and Denmark, both of which soon fell. Next, the forces slammed into the Netherlands and Belgium. Miracle of Dunkirk. By May, German forces were pouring into France. Retreating British forces were soon trapped between the advancing Nazis and the waters of the English Channel. In a desperate gamble, the British sent all available naval vessels, merchant ships, and even fishing and pleasure boats across the Channel to pluck stranded troops off the beaches of Dunkirk and Ostend. Despite German air attacks, the improvised armada ferried more than 300,000 troops to safety in Britain. This historic rescue, dubbed the Miracle of Dunkirk, greatly raised British morale. France falls. Meanwhile, German forces headed south toward Paris. Italy declared war on France and attacked from the south. Overrun and demoralized, France surrendered. On June 22nd, 1940, in a forest clearing in the northeastern France, Hitler avenged the German defeat of 1918. He forced the French to sign a surrender document in the same railroad car in which Germany had signed the armistice ending World War I. Whoa. Following the surrender, Germany occupied northern France. In the south, the Germans set up a puppet state with its capital at Vichy. Some French officers escaped to England and set up a government in exile led by Charles de Gaulle. These Free French worked to liberate their homeland. Within France, resistance fighters used guerrilla tactics against German forces. Africa and the Balkans. Axis armies also pushed into North Africa and the Balkans. In September 1940, Mussolini ordered forces from Italy's North African colony of Libya into Egypt. When the British army repulsed these invaders, Hitler sent a brilliant commander, General Erwin Rommel, to North Africa. The Desert Fox, as he was called, chalked up string of successes in 1941 and 1942. He pushed the British back across desert towards Cairo in Egypt. In October of 1940, Italian forces invaded Greece. They encountered stiff resistance. In 1941, German troops once again provided reinforcements. Both Greece and Yugoslavia were added to the Axis empire. Greece? I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. Greece was part of the Axis powers. Even after the Axis triumph, however, Greek and Yugoslav guerrillas plagued the occupying force. Alright, so they didn't fall in line entirely. Meanwhile, with Bulgaria and Hungary had joined the Axis alliance. By 1941, the Axis powers and their allies controlled most of Western Europe. Technology of modern warfare. The whirlwind of Nazi advances revealed the awesome power of modern warfare. Air power took a prominent role. After its tryout in Spain, the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, perfected methods of bombing civilian as well as military targets. Hitler also used fast-moving armored tanks and troop carriers, along with parachute troops, to storm through Europe. Technology created a war machine with even greater destructive power. Scientists and engineers improved the design and effectiveness of airplanes and submarines. They produced even more deadly bombs and invented hundreds of new devices, such as radar to detect airplanes and sonar to detect submarines. At the same time, research had also led to medical advances to treat wounded and new synthetic prosthetics to replace scarce strategic goods. Let me read that again. At the same time, research also led to medical advances to treat the wounded and the new synthetic products to replace scarce strategic goods. I don't know what they're talking about. Very vague. The Battle of Britain and the Blitz. With the fall of France in June 1940, Britain stood alone in Western Europe. Hitler was sure that Britain would sue for peace. But Winston Churchill, who had replaced Neville Chamberlain as Prime Minister, had other plans. For many years, Churchill had been a lone voice against the Nazi threat. In 1940, he rallied the British to fight on. "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." That's Winston Churchill on the radio on June 4th, 1940. June 4th, 1940. Faced with this defiance, Hitler ordered his generals to make plans for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. In preparation for this invasion, he launched massive airstrikes against the island nation. The London Blitz. Beginning on August 12th, 1940, So 2 months after the "We Shall Never Quit" speech on the radio, beginning on August 12, 1940, German bombers began daily bombardment of England's southern coast. For a month, the British Royal Air Force valiantly battled the German Luftwaffe. Then the Germans changed their tactics, turning their attention from military targets in the south to the blitz or bombing of London and other cities. German bombers first appeared over London late on September 7th. All through the night, rallies of aircrafts showered high explosives and fire bombs on the sprawling capital of London. The bombing continued for 57 nights. Much of the city was destroyed, and some 15,000 people lost their lives. London did not break under the Blitz. Defiantly, Parliament continued to meet. Citizens carried out their daily lives seeking protection and shelter, and then emerging when all clear sounded to resume their routines. Even the British King and Queen chose to support the Londoners by joining them in the bomb shelters rather than fleeing to the countryside. Really. Failures of the Blitz. German planes continued to bomb London and other cities off and on until June 1941. But contrary to Hitler's hopes, British morale was not destroyed. In fact, the bombing only made the British more determined to turn back the enemy. Operation Sea Lion was a failure. Hitler turned to a new target, the Soviet Union. The decision to invade Russia helped save Britain. It also proved to be one of Hitler's costliest mistakes. Operation Barbarossa. In 1941, June, Hitler embarked on Operation Barbarossa, the conquest of the Soviet Union. Hitler made his motives clear. If I had the Ural Mountains with their incalculable store of treasures in raw materials, he declared, Siberia with its vast forests, and the Ukraine with its tremendous wheat fields, Germany, under National Socialist leadership, would swim in plenty. That was a really bad accent. He also wanted to crush communism in Europe and defeat his powerful rival Joseph Stalin. The German advance in Operation Barbarossa, Hitler unleashed a new blitzkrieg. About 3 million Germans poured into the Soviet Union. They caught Stalin unprepared. His army still suffering from the purges that wiped them out. Many of its tops... What? They caught Stalin unprepared. His army still suffering from the purges that had wiped out many of its top officers. The Russians lost 2.5 million soldiers trying to fend off the invaders. Wow. They had, as they were forced back, Russian troops destroyed factories and farm equipment and burned crops to keep them out of enemy hands. But they could not stop the German war machine. By autumn, the Nazis had smashed deep into Russia and were poised to take Moscow and Leningrad. There, however, the German advance stalled. Like Napoleon's Grand Army in 1812, Hitler's forces were not prepared for the fury of Russia's general winter. By early December, temperatures plunged to -4 degrees. Thousands of German soldiers froze to death. That's 4 degrees American, Fahrenheit. Siege of Leningrad. The Russians, meanwhile, suffered appalling hardships. In September 1941, 2.5-year siege of Leningrad began. Food was soon rationed to 2 pieces of bread a day. Desperate Leningraders ate almost anything. They boiled wallpaper, scraped off walls because its paste was said to contain potato flour. Owners of leather briefcases boiled and ate them. Jellied meat, they call it. Although more than 1 million Leningraders died during the German siege, the survivors struggled to defend their cities. Hoping to gain some relief for the exhausted Russians, Stalin urged Britain to open a second front in Western Europe. Although Churchill could not offer much real help, the two powers did agree to work together. American involvement grows. When the war began in 1939, the United States declared its neutrality. Although isolationist feelings remained strong, many Americans sympathized with those who battled the Axis powers. Later, President Roosevelt found ways around the Neutrality Acts to provide aid, including warships to Britain as it stood alone against Hitler. Arsenal of Democracy. In 1941, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, persuaded Congress to pass the Lend-Lease Act. It allowed him to sell or lend war materials to any country whose defense the president deemed vital to the defense of the United States. The United States said Roosevelt would not be drawn into the war, but it would become the arsenal of democracy, supplying arms to those who were fighting for freedom. Atlantic Charter. In August 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill met secretly on warship. In August 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill met secretly on a warship in the Atlantic. The two leaders issued the Atlantic Charter, which set goals for the war: the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny and the post-war world. They pledged to support the right of all people to choose the form of government under which they will live, and called for a permanent system of general security. Japan attacks. In December of 1941, the Allies gained a vital boost when a surprise action by Japan suddenly pitched the United States into war. From the late 1930s, Japan had been trying to conquer China. Although Japan occupied much of the eastern China, the Chinese would not surrender. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, the Japanese saw a chance to grab European possessions in Southeast Asia. The rich resources of the region, including oil, rubber, and tin, would be immense value in fighting the Chinese war. Growing tensions. In 1940, Japan advanced into French Indochina, and Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia. To stop Japanese aggression, the United States banned the sale to Japan of war materials such as iron, steel, and oil for airplanes. This move angered the Japanese. Japan and the United States had held talks to ease the growing tensions, but extreme militarists such as General Tojo Hideki were gaining power in Japan. They hoped to seize lands in Asia and the Pacific, and the United States was interfering with their plans. Attack on Pearl Harbor. With talks at a standstill, General Tojo Hideki ordered a surprise attack on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Early on December 7th, 1941, Japanese airplanes damaged and destroyed 19 ships, smashed American planes on the ground, and killed more than 2,400 people. The next day, a grim-faced President Roosevelt told the nation that December 7th was a date which will live on in infamy. He asked Congress to declare war on Japan. On December 11th, Germany and Italy, as Japan's allies, declared war on the United States. Japanese victories. In the long run, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor would be as serious a mistake as Hitler's invasion of Russia. But the months after Pearl Harbor gave no such hint. Instead, European and American possessions in the Pacific fell one by one to the Japanese. They captured the Philippines and seized other American islands across the Pacific, they being the Japanese. They overran the British colonies of Hong Kong, Burma, and Malaya, pushed deeper into Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, and completed the takeover of French Indochina. By the beginning of 1942, the Japanese Empire stretched from Southeast Asia on the western Pacific Ocean to the western Pacific Ocean. The Axis powers had reached the high point of their success at the beginning of 1942. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you have a lovely day, and God bless. Goodbye.